Hello, my friend. I'm Paul. Welcome to Night of Tales, a quiet refuge for imagination and dreams. Set aside your worries, as tonight we journey together through worlds of magic, mystery, and wonder. Lie back, relax, and let the tales carry you away. Tonight, our paths leads us into the ancient lands of Middle-earth. The year was 3002 of the Third Age. It was a time of deep and abiding peace in the Shire. The great events of the world were mere whispers here. They were stories told by the firelight. They were not yet realities that knocked upon the door. The days were long. The earth was generous. In the northern reaches of the East Farthing lay the quiet lands of the Bolger family. This was the country of Budgliery. It was a place of rolling hills and hidden valleys. The air here was always crisp. It carried the scent of turned earth. It smelled of late autumn leaves and wood smoke. The sun hung low in the western sky. Its light was thick and golden. It turned the green pastures into mounds of amber. Long shadows stretched across the grass. It was the time of day when the world seemed to hold its breath. Estella Bolger sat upon a weathered wooden fence. She rested her chin on her hands. She watched the family flock. She was young by the reckoning of Hobbits. She had seen only 17 summers. She was not yet coming of age. Yet she possessed a spirit that was rare in these parts. Her father was a steady and respectable Bolger, but her mother was Rosamunda Took. The Took blood ran strong in Estella. It hummed in her veins. It made her curious about the horizon. It made her wonder what lay beyond the edges of the maps. The sheep grazed peacefully. They were heavy with wool for the coming winter. Their coats were thick and creamy white. They moved slowly across the clover. Their chewing was a rhythmic sound. It was a comforting noise. It was the sound of the Shire at rest. Most of the flock stayed close to the bottom of the valley. The grass there was sweet. It was watered by a small brook that babbled over smooth stones. The sheep were content. They had no desire to wander. But one sheep was different. He was a young ram. He had a distinctive patch of black wool on his left flank. It looked like a splash of ink. He was restless. He did not graze with the others. He stood at the edge of the herd. He looked toward the northern ridge. The grass up there was sparse. The terrain was rocky and uneven. It was the border of the wild country. It was not sensible grazing land. Estella watched him. She knew his temperament. He was stubborn. He was adventurous. In that way, he was not unlike herself. "Stay put," she whispered. The wind rustled the dried leaves of an oak tree nearby. It sounded like a sigh. The ram did not listen to her whisper. He took a step toward the slope. Then he took another. He found a tuft of green weed between two stones. He ate it. He looked up. He saw another tuft higher up. He began to climb. Estella hopped down from the fence. Her boots hit the soft turf with a thud. She adjusted her woolen cloak. It was a deep green. It was dyed with the juices of blackberries. The air was growing colder as the sun dipped lower. She called out to the ram. Her voice was clear in the quiet valley. Come back. It is time for supper. The animal twitched his ears. He did not turn around. He continued his ascent. He moved with a surprising speed for such a round creature. He disappeared over the crest of the first hill. Estella sighed. She tightened the laces of her walking boots. She checked the pockets of her pinafore. She had a handkerchief. She had a small apple. It would have to be enough. She grabbed her walking stick from the grass. It was a piece of stout ash wood. It was polished smooth by years of use. She began to climb. The ground changed under her feet. The soft soil of the farm gave way to flint and limestone. The grass became wiry. It crunched beneath her boots. She crested the hill. She shielded her eyes against the setting sun. She expected to see the ram just on the other side. She expected to see him eating a patch of thistles. The hillside was empty. She looked further north. The land rose into the jagged shapes of the North Moors. It was a place few hobbits visited. It was a land of old stones. Tales were told of ancient ruins in that place. Mothers told their children not to wander there. She spotted a speck of white in the distance. The ram was moving quickly. He was heading deeper into the rocky lands. He was a small dot against the gray and brown of the moors. Estella hesitated. The sensible part of her mind spoke to her. It told her to turn back. It told her that a lost sheep was a small loss. It told her that tea was waiting at home. But the Took in her did not agree. A Took did not give up so easily. A Took did not let a wayward animal defeat them. She gripped her stick firmly. She took a deep breath of the cooling air. She marched forward. She left the green fields behind. She walked into the long shadows of the north. The walk became a scramble. The terrain of the moors was treacherous. It was not like the gentle slopes of the Shire. Here the earth was broken. Loose stones rattled underfoot. They slid away as she stepped on them. Heather and gorse grew in thick tangles. They snagged at the hem of Estella's skirt. They scratched at her boots. She followed the white shape of the ram. He was always just ahead. He seemed to be playing a game. He would stop and look back. He would wait until she was close. Then he would turn and trot away again. Estella pushed on. Her breath came in small white puffs. The exertion kept her warm. The afternoon wore on. The golden light faded. It turned to a bruised purple. Then it settled into a deep gray. The temperature dropped. It was a sharp cold. It was the kind of cold that seeped into the bones. Estella stopped to catch her breath. She leaned on her stick. She looked back the way she had come. She felt a jolt of surprise. She could no longer see the fence. She could no longer see the smoke from the chimneys of Budgliery. The familiar shapes of the Shire were gone. The hills had risen up behind her. They blocked the view of home. A change came over the air. It became heavy. It felt damp against her skin. Estella looked to the east. A wall of white was rolling down from the high hills. It was a fog. It moved with unnatural speed. It did not drift like a morning mist. It poured like water. It flowed over the stones. It filled the hollows of the ground. "Oh dear," she whispered. She turned to find the ram. He was gone. The white one vanished into the white mist. The fog overtook her. It was sudden and absolute. It swallowed the world. The sound of the wind died. The sound of distant birds ceased. There was only silence. It was a heavy silence. It pressed against her ears. Estella turned a full circle. Every direction looked the same. The gray stone was muted by the vapor. The brown heather was hidden. There were no shadows to guide her. The sun was completely hidden behind the blanket of cloud. Panic began to rise in her chest. It fluttered like a trapped bird. She remembered stories of travelers lost in the mists. She remembered tales of the Barrow Downs. She remembered stories of things that walked unseen in the white cold. She took a deep breath. She forced herself to be calm. She closed her eyes for a moment. She pictured her father's face. She pictured the round green door of her home. "You are a Bolger," she said aloud. Her voice sounded small. It was swallowed by the fog. "You have a good head on your shoulders." She opened her eyes. She decided not to wander aimlessly. That was how one walked in circles. That was how one became truly lost. She searched the ground near her feet. She found a large boulder. It loomed out of the gray like a sleeping giant. It offered some shelter from the damp air. She sat at its base. She pulled her knees to her chest. She wrapped her green cloak tight around herself. She waited. The silence was profound. It felt ancient. This was not the comfortable quiet of a hobbit hole at night. This was the silence of the mountains. It was the silence of stones that had sat unturned for thousands of years. Time seemed to stretch. Estella could not tell if minutes or hours had passed. The light grew dimmer. Night was falling beyond the fog. Her hands grew cold. She rubbed them together. She blew on her fingers. She thought of her warm kitchen. She thought of the kettle whistling on the hob. She thought of toasted bread and butter. The memory seemed very far away. It belonged to a different world. Then she heard a sound. It was faint. It was delicate. It was not the bleating of a sheep. It was not the cry of a bird. It was a soft clinking. It sounded like stone striking metal, or perhaps metal striking stone. It came from somewhere ahead in the mist. Estella stood up. Her legs were stiff. She grasped her stick. She moved slowly toward the sound. She stepped carefully. She tested the ground before placing her weight. She moved into the unknown gray. The fog swirled around her. It seemed to have a life of its own. Shapes loomed out of the whiteness. They looked like towers or trolls, but they were only rocks. They vanished again as she passed. Estella saw a faint light ahead. It was not the red glow of a fire. It was cool. It was pale. It looked like a star that had fallen to earth. It was caught in a lantern of glass. She moved closer. The light remained steady. It did not flicker in the damp air. She rounded a large outcropping of granite. She stopped in her tracks. She held her breath. A figure sat upon a flat stone slab. He was tall. He was taller than any man of the Breland. He was slender and strong. He wore a gray cloak that blended with the mist. The fabric seemed to shimmer like spider webs. His hair was long and dark as the night sky. It was an elf. Estella had heard stories of elves all her life. Her uncle Bilbo had spoken of them often. He told tales of their singing in the woods. He said they were passing to the Grey Havens. He said they were fair and dangerous. But she had never truly believed she would see one. They were the stuff of legends. The elf was looking down at his hands. He seemed deep in sorrow. He was perfectly still. He looked like a statue carved from starlight. The light came from a jewel at his throat. It shone with a steady inner radiance. It pushed back the fog in a small circle around him. Estella stepped on a loose pebble. The stone clattered against the rock. The sound was sharp in the silence. The elf looked up. His movement was fluid. It was too fast for a mortal to follow. His eyes met hers. They were bright and piercing. They were gray as the sea. They held the light of many years. They held the memory of things long gone. He did not look frightening. He looked surprised. A halfling, he whispered. His voice was like music. It was melodic and rich. It resonated in the damp air. It sounded like water falling into a deep pool. Estella bowed. It was an awkward bow. Her cloak got in the way. It was the only thing she could think to do. "Good evening," she said with her voice trembled slightly. The elf stood. He moved with a grace that made him seem weightless. He towered over her, yet he did not seem threatening. "Good evening to you," he replied. He spoke the common speech, but he spoke it with an accent of the elder days. "I did not expect to meet one of the little folk in these cold hills. You are far from your warm fires." "I am lost," admitted Estella. "I followed a sheep. The fog came too quickly. I do not know which way is south." The elf nodded slowly. He looked at the swirling mist. "It is a natural vapor, though it is thick tonight. The earth is breathing out the cold of the coming winter. I am Galder. I am of the wandering companies. I am Estella Bolger." She stepped a little closer. The light of his jewel made the fog seem less oppressive. It felt warmer near him. "Can you help me?" asked Estella. "Do you know the way back to the grain fields? The stories say elves know all paths." Galder sighed. It was a heavy sound. It carried the weight of the world. "I know the way," he said proudly. "I can see the path even in the dark. But I cannot leave this spot. Not yet." Estella looked around. There was nothing here but bare rock and wet moss. "Why?" she asked. "Why must you stay?" Galder pointed to the ground near his feet. There was a narrow fissure in the earth. It was a jagged crack in the limestone. It was perhaps a foot wide. It went down into deep darkness. It looked like a scar on the land. "I sat to rest," Galder explained. "I was weary from the long road to the sea. My harp slipped from my shoulder. The strap broke. It fell into this crevice." He knelt by the opening. He looked down with longing. "It is caught upon a ledge below. My arm is too broad to reach it. The stone is too hard to break. I have tried. I cannot reach it." He looked up at Estella. His eyes were sad. "It is not a simple instrument," he added softly. "It was crafted in the West. It was made in the undying lands. It has accompanied me for centuries. It holds the songs of my kin. I cannot lead it to the wind and rain. I cannot lead it to be forgotten in the dark." Estella looked at the fissure. She looked at the elf. He was powerful. He was wise. He had seen ages pass. Yet he was helpless against the stubborn earth. She crept to the edge of the hole. She peered down. The fissure was narrow. It was dark. But it was not too narrow for a hobbit. Estella saw a glint of silver in the deep shadow. The harp was wedged between two rocks. It was about an arm's length down, maybe a little more. She looked up at Galder. "I can reach it," she said quietly. The elf looked at her. He assessed her size. He looked at her small hands. "It is dangerous. The stone is slick with moisture. If you slip, you could fall deeper. The earth is deep here." Estella felt a flutter of fear in her stomach. The hole looked like a hungry mouth. She did not like small dark places. She liked open fields and windows. But she looked at the elf's face. She saw how much the instrument meant to him. It was a piece of his soul. It was a memory of his home. She thought of her mother. Rosamunda Took had once crossed a brandywine in a barrel. Or so the story went. Estella could certainly reach into a hole. "I will not fall." She tried to sound brave. "I am a Took on my mother's side. We are sure-footed. And we are stubborn." She unclasped her cloak. She laid it on the rock. "Hold my ankles," she instructed. Galder knelt. His movement was solemn. He placed his large hands around her boots. His grip was gentle, but it was firm. It felt as strong as iron. "I have you," he said loud. "I will not let you fall." Estella took a deep breath. She lay down on her stomach. The cold stone pressed against her chest. The dampness seeped through her clothes. She lowered her head into the fissure. The world turned upside down. The air inside the crack smelled of ancient dust. It smelled of wet flint. It was cold. The walls pressed in on her shoulders. For a moment she felt trapped. The darkness seemed to press against her eyes. She closed her eyes for a second to steady herself. Then she opened them. She reached out her hand. Her fingers brushed against damp stone. She stretched further. Her shoulder joint popped. She could see the harp clearly now. It was small. It was silver. It was carved with leaves and vines that seemed to twist and grow. It was beautiful. It gave off a faint hum. She stretched her arm until her muscles burned. Her fingertips grazed the wood. It was just out of reach. "Lower me a little more," she called out. Her voice sounded hollow in the hole. It echoed back to her. She felt herself slide down another inch. The stone scraped her jacket. "Careful," Galder's voice came from above. It was calm and anchoring. She reached again. She wiggled her fingers. This time her fingers hooked around the frame of the harp. She gripped it tight. It was surprisingly light. It felt warm to the touch. It felt like it was alive. "I have it," she shouted. Her voice was muffled. She pulled the harp free from the rocks. She held it close to her chest to protect it. "Pull me up." Galder pulled. The movement was smooth. It was steady. Estella slid backward out of the darkness. She moved easily against the stone. She emerged into the gray twilight. She gasped for the fresh air. It tasted sweet. She sat up. She brushed the dirt from her pinafore. She held out the silver harp. Galder took it. His hands were trembling slightly. It was the only sign of his emotion. He examined the wood. He checked the silver strings. He ran his thumb over the carvings. It was unharmed. He looked at Estella. His face broke into a radiant smile. It was like the sun breaking through winter clouds. It changed his whole demeanor. The sorrow vanished. "You have done a great deed," Galder said and bowed his head to her. "Small hands can do what great power cannot. I am in your debt. Estella of the Shire." Galder stood tall. He held the harp against his chest. He looked like a king of old. "The fog is thick and you are far from home. The night is upon us." He looked toward the south. The mist was a solid wall. "I cannot guide you by hand, for I must travel west tonight. My company waits for me at the Tower Hills. We travel to the sea." Estella felt a pang of disappointment. She was still lost. "But I can show you the path," Galder said with a smile. "I will give you a gift for a gift." "How?" asked Estella. "With this," said Galder. He touched the strings of the harp. The earth remembers music. The air obeys it. The mist is but water and wind. It will listen. He plucked a single string. The sound was pure. It was not loud, but it carried. It vibrated in Estella's bones. It was a note of absolute clarity. It cut through the damp air like a knife. Galder began to play. The melody was slow. It was wandering. It sounded like water flowing over smooth stones. It sounded like the wind in high branches. It sounded like starlight falling on quiet leaves. Estella watched in wonder. She forgot the cold. She forgot her fear. As the music rose, the fog began to churn. The heavy white curtain started to shred. It swirled as if caught in a breeze. But there was no breeze. Only the music. Wisps of vapor dissolved into nothingness. The gray wall in front of them thinned. It became transparent. Above them the sky appeared. It opened like a blooming flower. The gray vanished. The deep indigo of the night sky was revealed. The stars were shining with a cold brilliance. They looked closer than Estella had ever seen them. The mist retreated. It rolled back into the hollows of the ground. It poured off the hills like water draining away. The landscape was revealed. The moon had risen. It was a crescent of silver. It cast long shadows across the moors. The rocks shone white in the moonlight, and there, standing near a patch of heather, was the ram. He looked up as the music played. He chewed on a stem of grass. He did not run. He seemed calmed by the song. He looked at Estella with large dark eyes. Galder stopped playing. The final note hung in the air for a long time. It faded slowly into the silence. "Look," Galder said and pointed south. Estella looked. Without the fog, she could see the shape of the land. She saw the familiar curve of the hills. She saw the dark line of the hedges. And far below, she saw the distant lights of the Shire. They were warm yellow specks in the darkness. They were the lights of windows and lamps. "I see the way," she said softly. "I see Budgliery." She turned to thank the elf. She wanted to ask him more. She wanted to ask about the sea. She wanted to ask about his songs. "Go now," Galder said gently. His voice was soft. "The sheep is waiting. The path is clear. May the stars shine upon your face." "And upon yours," said Estella. She remembered the phrase from an old story. She hoped she said it right. Galder bowed low. It was a bow of deep respect. Estella walked to the ram. He did not resist as she grabbed his wool. He seemed eager to return to the flock. He seemed to know that the adventure was over. They walked down the hillside together. The ground was firm. The stars were bright guides overhead. She looked back once. The figure of the elf was gone. There was only the silent stone. There was only the vast sky. Estella descended into the valley. The air grew warmer as she reached the lower fields. The smell of the moors faded. The smell of the Shire returned. She guided the ram back into the pen. She latched the gate. The other sheep were sleeping. They were woolly mounds in the dark. She walked to her door. She was tired. Her limbs felt heavy, but it was a pleasant heaviness. It was the weight of a job done. She entered the smile. It was warm. It smelled of dried herbs and beeswax. It was safe. She would not tell anyone about the elf. Not yet. It would be her secret. It was a treasure she would keep in her heart. She climbed into her bed. The sheets were cool and soft. She pulled the heavy quilt up to her chin. She closed her eyes. In her mind, she could still hear the silver harp. It played a lullaby of starlight and clearing mist. The song drifted through her thoughts. It carried her slowly and gently into sleep.